The Once and Future King. This book, if you wanted to say it were about one thing in just one word, it would be justice. And how we can define justice. So if we were to compare it to the Iliad being about strength, and then Paradise Lost being about freedom, and say Moby Dick being about obsession, then The Once and Future King is about justice. Not just justice as law, not as just simply punishment or as civilization. It asks, can power ever become moral? Notice the wording, not can moral people acquire power, rather can power itself become moral. This exact question is what White spent the whole book writing about. And the whole book comes to an answer. There's a hopeful side to the answer, and then there's a horrific side to it. Either way, answering this for yourself in your life will produce results. And one of the main characters here, Arthur, he's not actually the protagonist even. It surprises a lot of people, but Arthur appears to be in the center of the whole story, but he isn't. He's not the protagonist, he's just the experiment. The true protagonist is the idea of civilization. Everything else exists to test it. Arthur is less a king than a hypothesis. Suppose one perfectly decent human being inherited absolute authority. Suppose he genuinely desired peace, he possessed extraordinary intelligence, and suppose he loves humanity. Would history finally become just? White's answer is no. Because injustice does not originate primarily in institutions. It originates inside people. And so in the education of Arthur, the novel begins with perhaps the strangest education in literature itself. Marilyn teaches Arthur by transforming him into animals. At first this feels pretty whimsical, like what is this? This is children's literature, this is fantasy. It's not though. Every animal kingdom becomes a political philosophy. White quietly does something pretty astonishing here. Instead of lecturing Arthur about government, he lets Arthur inhabit different civilizations. So like the fish, the ants, the geese, the badgers. They aren't simply creatures, they're constitutional systems. Different metaphysical assumptions about existence. So a fish among the fish might simply exist. There's only hierarchy, only larger fish, smaller fish, predator and prey, right? Power requires no justification. The strongest rule because they can. Arthur's first political lesson is therefore the oldest. Nature itself contains no democracy, no equality, no rights. These must be invented. And so next we go to the ants. This chapter is pretty modern because the ants obsess for perfect efficiency, perfect organization, perfect obedience. Everything functions, but nothing lives. Individuality disappears entirely. Language itself becomes mechanical, questions vanish, only commands remain. White wrote this while fascism and communism were reshaping Europe, right? So he understood something pretty terrifying. Totalitarianism does not necessarily arise from hatred. Sometimes it arises from excessive love of order. A perfectly efficient society may become perfectly inhuman. Next we go to the geese. Perhaps the novel's most beautiful chapter because the geese possess no borders, no nationalism, no permanent warfare. They cannot understand why humans continually divide themselves into competing tribes. Arthur asks why they never fight wars. The geese literally cannot comprehend the question. Notice White's brilliance. He never claims geese are morally superior. Rather, they lack the psychological structures that produce political violence. Identity itself has been organized differently. And finally, the badger. Arthur learns humanity's defining condition. Human beings are unique because they remain unfinished. Every animal perfectly fulfills its nature. Only humanity can choose. As freedom enters creation, within freedom comes ethics and tragedy. While White has summarized pretty much most of Western political philosophy, like Hobbes, Rousseau, Plato, Marx, Nietzsche, all of it's hidden inside these dumb children's adventures, and Arthur's great discoveries. Arthur eventually realizes something profound, though. Instead of preventing violence, perhaps violence itself can be redirected. This becomes the birth of chivalry. Knights already exist. They already fight. Arthur asks, what if strength served weakness? Instead of conquering villages, protect them. Instead of exploiting peasants, defend them. The Round Table emerges from this insight because we now see power receiving purpose. It may be the novel's most important contribution. Author never abolishes force, he moralizes force. That distinction is very, very clear as we now see the Round Table. And many readers imagine the Round Table symbolizes something like equality. That's only partially true. The deeper symbolism is orientation. A normal throne room possesses hierarchy. Everyone faces the king. Meaning then flows outward. At the Round Table, there is no head. Everyone faces everyone else. Power becomes reciprocal. Conversation replaces command. It is architecture expressing philosophy. White understands something political theorists forget. Buildings teach, cities teach, furniture teaches. The shape of the room changes the shape of thought. Now we move to the character called Lancelot. Traditionally, he's the perfect knight, but White transforms him into something psychologically much richer, and he writes Lancelot so that it's clear that Lancelot hates himself. He believes himself to be really ugly, corrupt, and unworthy. So he pursues perfection with almost pathological intensity. He performs miracles because he cannot believe he deserves love. This is one of literature's deepest observations because self-hatred often disguises itself as excellence. Many extraordinary people are not motivated by confidence. They are fleeing inadequacy. Lancelot becomes holy not because he loves perfection, but because he desperately hopes perfection might eventually teach him to love himself. Then we move on to the character Guinevere. Guinevere represents something White continually likes to return to. Human beings cannot live entirely according to principles because love disrupts systems. No constitution ever accounts perfectly for desire. No law anticipates every affection. Author creates the greatest political order imaginable. Yet one love triangle eventually threatens the entire kingdom. White's not trying to say romance destroys civilizations. He's saying civilization always depends upon hearts that remain beyond legislation. Then we can move to Mordred. Most adaptations portray Mordred as like evil incarnate, right? White reviews as such. Mordred instead becomes resentment embodied. He grows inside the emotional failures of previous generations. Author's hidden sins become historical consequences. This is perhaps White's best insights, in my opinion, because it's pointing out history remembers what individuals want forgotten. The next generation inherits unresolved moral debts. Civilizations collapse not only because of external enemies, but because yesterday's compromises eventually become tomorrow's revolutions. Perfect institutions cannot redeem imperfect souls. Author successfully reforms law, military organization, justice, education, political legitimacy, yet every reform depends upon people remaining morally awake. Eventually they don't. The Round Table slowly becomes what institution risks becoming. It forgets why it was created. Procedure replaces purpose. Honor becomes performative, tradition survives, but meaning evaporates. White suggests this is the natural entropy of civilization. Every generation inherits forms. Few inherit understanding. And as in the ending, author spends the final night before battle reflecting upon his life, and many readers expect despair. Instead, they receive something much quieter, which is that author realizes that ideas survive differently than individuals. Camelot may perish, its principles will not. Justice itself can migrate. One civilization can even die, another remembers. The title suddenly reveals its meaning. Once and future. King. Author's never merely just one man. He becomes an ideal, continually awaiting rediscovery. Every generation receives another opportunity to ask, how shall power serve justice? So yeah, that's The Once and Future King. Great book. I love it. In addition to Animal Farm. As for the list, we have The Brothers Karamazov. We have The Trial, which is basically about this guy that gets arrested and put on trial, and he's never told the reason why. And throughout the whole entire book, he never even figures that out. That's a really fucking good one. Then the next, of course, Beowulf. Then Blood Meridian. And followed by The Road, which I believe is written by the same author. I put them in tandem. Blood Meridian is really striking, and then The Road is kind of pulling in a completely polar opposite direction. Um, then I'd move to two more darker novels on this list: Fear and Trembling, and then The Heart of Darkness. Funnily enough, a lot of people can see Heart of Darkness directly being inspiration for Blood Meridian. We can also have a corny cliche Joseph Campbell book here, A Hero with a Thousand Faces. Then moving on, this is a really cool one in my opinion. This book's called The Stranger. You can think of it as like the grandfather book of neurodivergence, and many speculate it's particularly about autism. Within the book, it's the story and the plot is just completely absurd. It's really strange and violent. It's very cool. If that's your thing, I would definitely recommend picking that one up. Then I want to go to Book of the New Sun. This is a book about assumption and perception. If you're not deep into this, don't even bother picking it up because it's a book you need to read through the entire thing to then go back and look through details to make sense of shit. So then we can move on to the Denial of Death if you're more into the existential stuff right now. Then if you want a combination of fucking everything that we've talked about in this video, I'd recommend The Castle. Who is that guy? Kafka, whatever his name is. Really weird writing in my opinion. I can't stand it for too long, but other people go dummy crazy on that. Anyway, next, final two would be Paradise Lost and then Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I have two videos already on those two, and I'll put that in. I should put that at the end credits, like related videos type thing. Anyway, peace.